Hi everyone, in this video we're going to talk about functions in Flowgorithm. What are functions? They're separate Flowgorithm charts that complete a specific task. Just like the main function we have been using so far, it is a bunch of shapes that complete a specific task. They can take one or more arguments. You can pass arguments to the functions, and they can sometimes return one single value after task completion. They can only return one single value. Remember that all the time. And some possible function structures here are the first one, functions that don't take arguments and don't return a value. That means they're going to complete a specific task and most likely print a message on the screen at the end. As an example for that, a function that asks for a username and password, then prints a message if it is valid user credentials or not. For that, we're going to use a function called shape only. So let's do this example. We're going to first create our function, okay? And for that purpose, you're going to click on that function manager icon, and you're going to add this new function, okay? Let's click on that and say username, okay, validate user. Let's call it validate user 1 function, okay? And then it's not going to take any parameter, okay, and or arguments, and it will not return anything. So we will just if there was any parameters, we will just add it here, arguments, and we could actually also later edit those parameters or remove those parameters and change their orders. But we're not going to add those arguments in this example, and also we're not going to have any return type. Any return type would be any data type, and we will name it as a variable later on. But this specific function is not taking any parameters or arguments, and it's not returning a value. So just click OK. Our function is ready. There you go. On the top you will see the function name, validate user 1, and it ends. Just like it looks like main method. To switch between the functions you have, click on that arrow and then go to main or go to validate user. So let's do this. What does it do? It is asking for a username and password, and then it's printing a message if it is valid user credentials or not. Okay, so for that reason we're going to have a username variable, which is going to be a string. Username is a string, and then okay, and a password, and the password is going to be a string. Well, actually, rename this as actual password as string, and rename the other one as actual username, because you will see why soon. Actual username as a string. Okay, when we're comparing usernames and passwords to see if the user is valid or not, we have to have some predefined user, right? And that is why I created this actual username and actual password to give to create a user, okay? And actual username will be a string value. Let's call this John B, okay? And then the actual password for John B will be actual password for John B would be ABC123, okay? And then click OK. There you go. Now we have the let's put a comment here saying that define a user, okay? And then from this point further we're gonna do the test, validate a user, okay? So We're gonna ask user to enter a username and password. If the username is zombie and the password abc123, then we're gonna print out a message saying that the user is valid, just like this example here. Asking for username and password, then prints a message if it is valid. So what I will do for that, I need a username for as a string. These are for users. Okay, the user will have these username and passwords, and we will actually compare against those. So let's see, and then ask the user. Okay, ask what's your username, and then save it in, read it from the keyboard, save it as the username, because this is new data, right? And then ask for the password. What is your password? Or enter your password, much better. Okay, I'm gonna change this one, enter your password, and username, enter your username, and enter your password, and then say the password inside the variable called password. Okay, we have created that password previously. So now I'm going to compare these two variables to see if the user is valid or not. As you know, if both conditions has to be true, we should use AND, okay, in the if statements, AND operator. So username is equal to actual username, and password is equal to actual password. In this case, if that is the case, the user will be valid, right? And then I would just say valid user. And then if that is not the case, here we have, I would say, invalid user, intruder alarm. Okay, and then this function would not do anything else, as it is explained here. This is a type of function that do not take arguments and don't return a value. It will just ask the user what is the username and password and compare it with the actual username and password, and then at the end it will say yes, you're a valid user, or no, you're not a valid user. And the function is completed, but I need to use it in the main. Okay, so what I will do in the main, I'll just call this function. If the function is not taking any parameters, I'm sorry, if it is not returning any resulting values, in this case I'm supposed to use a function call shape. Okay, so I'm just gonna click on that function call and then type the name of the function. Okay, what is the name of the function? Validate user 1. And when you're calling the functions, you might have parameters or you might not have any parameters. In our case, we don't have any parameters, that's why no arguments. I just leave the parenthesis empty, but you have to use the parenthesis. You should, as a rule of thumb, right? And you could also add more stuff in here in the main. Thanks for using my application, etc., something like that. And also at the beginning you would say this application validates a user. Okay, so as you see, you might have a bunch of shapes in your main, but when you need to do something else, it's gonna call the function, go to the function, run it from the beginning till the end, and then come back to the main. I think it's gonna look like this. For example, this function, this main method is using the function greeting, and when there's a call, it just jumps to the function, runs down, and then goes back to the function call, and then continues down on the main method, finishing the whole application, okay, completing the whole application. So, since it is ready, we can now start our function application and make a sample run. This application will let a user. Now, as you see, it just jumped into the validate user one function and then start running it. It did first the declarations and assignments, and then outputted the message, enter your username, and waiting for an input right now. And the input will be, let me enter the correct credentials first, John B, and then the password will be ABC123. This should validate the user. Valid user, thanks for using my application. And if you run it again, and then in this case I enter a valid username but a wrong password, then it will say invalid user, intruder alarm. Okay. In other case, I will use a wrong username but correct password, ABC123. Again, this is an invalid user. Okay, this is one type that we just studied. No arguments, no parameters, and no returning values. Okay, this is gonna be our first functions one algorithm application. Okay, and then I'm gonna create a new application for the second type. Now, the second type is functions that take arguments but don't return a value. Okay, so what I will do, I will create a function that will actually have the same name, validate user, forget about one, and it will, in this case, take the parameters. And what kind of parameters it will take? First, it will take a username, okay, as a string, and second, it will take a password as a string. Okay, as you see, the order of the parameters is important, and you can also change it. You click on this one, for example, the second one, and move it up. That is possible. But I want the username to be the first argument, right? And is it going to return anything? Not in this case, because according to our example, this function does take arguments, username and password, but it will not return a value. So it's going to take the username and password as arguments, then it will print a message if it is valid user with the credentials. That means we're going to do the same, but in this time you're taking the arguments, okay, from the main function. So as you see now, it looks different. Now that user will have two arguments, username and password, and remember that the order is important. When you're calling this function, you're going to call with the username first and the password later. So I'm going to have my declarations, one for the actual username. I could well, actually, since both of them are gonna be the string data type, I could actually use comma to declare more than one variable, actual password. Okay, and they both are gonna be strings. Okay, and then these two are passed to the function, so these variables are automatically created in the function because they are passed values, so I can actually use those values inside. But before doing that, inside the function, before doing that, I'm gonna give an actual username as John B, small case sensitive, remember that, John B, and also the assignment for an actual password here as ABC123. Okay, Now I can do my comparison between actual username and username and actual password and password, because these username and password values are passed into the function. They already exist in the function with these names. So I can actually do that and come over here saying that if username is equal to actual username and password is equal to, remember that you're using double equal signs, actual password. So if that is the case, it's gonna print the message saying that valid and otherwise invalid. Okay, it will just print the message and then it will not return anything. Okay, so what I will do with the main in this case, as you see, I had to take username and password as parameters, right, while I'm calling the function. So I had to add those username and passwords before I pass it to the function. So I will have my username as a string here, and then my password as a string here, and then I will just ask the user to answer username and password. Okay, enter your username, and then I will say save this into the username variable just like I did previously, and then I will ask for the password, enter your password, okay, and click OK, and then input that value from the keyboard as the password. Okay, once I'm done with that, now I can call the function with my username and password in order, first username and second password. So what I will do, I will call the function with validate user with username as the first parameter or argument, and then the password as the second one. So once I did do that, it will just print out valid or invalid, and then I will say at the end, thanks for using my application, okay, and then say alright. So as you see on the second version, it takes one or two more arguments, and then using those arguments in the function, and does something, completes a specific task, and then most likely print a message on the screen, just like in our validate user. It just prints out a message on the screen. Okay, and let me run it and see if it does work as planned. Enter username, first John B. This is main method, right? I am on the main method. I did not call the function yet. I haven't come that far. I'm on the input username part, and now I printed the message, the computer actually, and then password is gonna be entered. I will just enter the correct ones first and enter. Now it just calls the function, and then the function prints valid, and then goes back to my main, and then prints thanks for using my application. Now I'm going to enter some invalid information, John B, with wrong password, and then it says invalid. Okay, the function call works pretty fine. And as the last part or type of functions, I'm going to use a function that uses both taken arguments and returning values. Okay, for that reason, what I will do, let me save this first. Okay, functions 2, and then I will just delete this function call. Okay, deletes, if I can ever call it, deletes, and then add some more stuff, but I need to modify my function. Okay, this time, okay, let's create the function from scratch. I think it's better for you to learn remove. Okay, done. So create the new function and name it as validate user again, and the parameters will be again username and password as strings. Okay, username and password, and then this time this function will return a value. Okay, what to return is, it returns true if the user valid, false if invalid. True and false, that means I'm gonna return a boolean. Okay, and the boolean value will be, let's call it results, validation result. Okay, and then when I click OK, see what happens. Now I got the username and password, and the return value is validation result, and it's boolean, and it is already created. The declaration is done for me automatically. This is cool. So what I will do, I will keep adding my stuff after the declaration here. Okay, it is important because if you start adding stuff in here and try to assign a value to the boolean variable, it's going to create problems. It's going to say, oh, the validation result is not declared, because declarations always has to be before using them. Okay, so I'm gonna just click on that part, and then since I have username and password, I'm just gonna add one if statement saying that, okay, I forget about my actual users. You know, I had to have a sample user, right? So it's gonna be actual username and actual password. Both of them are strings. Okay, and here we go, and then I will just assign the values just like I did before. Actual username, and it's gonna be John B, and the actual password will be another assignment. Actual password will be ABC123. Okay, so now I can do my comparison in the condition test. If username is equal to actual username and password is equal to actual password, then I'm not going to print out anything this time. I will just set the validation result to true. Validation result to true, and return that value. I'll show you how it works in a second, and if the comparison turns out to be false, I will just return validation result as false. Okay, so what I'm basically doing here, I'm comparing the past arguments, username and password, with the actual username and password. If they do match, that means it's a valid user, and the validation result set to true boolean, and this function returns true in this case. Otherwise it returns false. So this is the common way to use functions. The functions in general, always they take an argument and then return a value. Okay, so I go back to main to use my function. Now I have username and password, right? And I'm gonna call this function, but before I call it, I need to know what kind of shape I need to do, And if I'm checking my notes, it says use the function in an assignment. That means because this function is returning a value, I just can't simply call it. I have to assign this returning value to a variable. That means in the main, I'm gonna need to declare a boolean, okay, is valid, a boolean data type, a variable, and then assign this value, a variable, to the returning the returning value from the function. What was my name of the function is validate user, I guess, and I'm gonna pass my username and password. Okay, so let me show you what does it do first. If I'm just gonna print out is valid first, and if I enter correct username and password, it should say true. If I'm not passing the correct username and password, in this case it should assign is valid variable, assign the false value, right? So I should see either true or false. Okay, so let's run it. Enter username and password. John B valid should be valid. ABC123 should be valid. So it's gonna print true. Yes. And now one more time. Enter John B with a wrong password. It should say false. Okay. And then another one. I enter completely wrong username as password. It returns false. So instead of just printing out true or false, I would actually print a better message. Is the user valid? And then is valid value. So that means it's gonna print out is the user valid, true, or is the user valid, false, and as a result. And then I just test it one more time. John B, ABC123. Is the user valid? It says here true. And one more time with the wrong one. John B and a bad password. Is the user valid? False. As you see, functions are very, very useful. They are separated from the main function. The main function, in other words, the application itself, and they should actually be implementing a very specific